Hey, my friends, it's Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. My kid got Smash Brothers a while back, the newest one. Remember how fun it was when we'd play a little bit and then you'd see the silhouette of a new character pop up and it was like, new challengers arrived or whatever. And we all start guessing, like based on the silhouette, who it was, and they pop up and you got to fight them. And if you beat them, it's like, hey, you have a new character to learn about now. This is great. Likewise, in Matthew chapter 26, I feel like we fought long enough that now the silhouette of a new character has appeared and he looks distinctively Roman. And it turns out that we're about to be introduced to one of the most famous non-Jewish characters in the entire Bible, the guy who would ultimately be responsible for signing the paperwork that would send Jesus to the cross, Pontius Pilate. Now, I'm in here. I want to read Matthew 27, 1 and 2, which is where Matthew first drops the name of Pilate. And when I do, what you'll notice is that Matthew is acting like you should know who that is. And indeed, everybody in the original audience would have known who Pontius Pilate is. And we're going to talk about his exact role and everything in a lot of detail coming up here. But the simple version is this. He was the governor of the Roman province of Judea. Now, what does that mean politically? How did the Romans arrive at the relationship they arrived at with the people they conquered? That's all stuff we got to talk about in the near term. And then longer term, we got to get into the details about this guy's life, how his governorship actually turned out. And then we'll sort of know Pilate a little bit more on the level that the original audience did. And hopefully it'll just make it easier to understand what's going on with Matthew. If you want to supercharge your knowledge of Pontius Pilate, you can go and check out the YouTube video that I did a couple years ago that I'm still really proud of. This was such a fun project for me. It's called something like, Who Was the Real Pontius Pilate? Historical Legends and Proofs, Historical Proof and Legends, something like that. You'll find it's on the 10-Minute Bible Hour YouTube channel. It's all going to work out. You don't have to watch that, but you can if you want to. But for our purposes, let's start by trying to better understand Rome's relationship with Judea. And if we understand that, maybe we can better understand Pilate's relationship with the characters we're seeing in the book of Matthew. Okay. Matthew 27, 1 and 2. Early in the morning, all the chief priests and the elders of the people came to the decision to put Jesus to death. All right, we saw that coming from chapter 26. But there's a note here that's important. They came to the decision to put him to death, but they don't get to put him to death because that's not the governmental structure that they're living under. And that's a very important wrinkle for everything in terms of how it unfolds from here. And it's an important wrinkle for the way that it reads back into things we've already looked at. It explains the behavior of Jesus' enemies. The Romans, I don't seem to care about anything. There was some centurion guy, and he seemed nice. He liked Jesus all the way back coming off the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 8. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Rome doesn't factor. But again, our issue here is that the religious leadership, they don't get to execute people. Only the Romans are allowed to execute people. So they're making a decision, but that doesn't have any teeth. They have to go and hand it over to Rome and be like, yeah, you got to do this for us. It's mandatory. It's your job. It's your responsibility, but you totally have to. And before we move forward here, I want to double click on how we got to this point in the relationship between Rome and the Jewish people, Rome and Judea. So if we scroll all the way back to the Assyrian Empire, who were at their zenith in the 8th century BC and who were the rivals and destructors of the northern kingdom of Israel, we see a policy that the Assyrians had toward their conquered enemies that was absolutely ruthless, but that also proved to be unsustainable. When they conquered people, if those people had irritated them in any way, they would just deport them, absorb them ethnically into other people groups, and the result would be that that group of people would be forgotten. It's like worse than salting the fields of Carthage. You are ethnically wrecking an entire heritage by simply breeding them out of historical existence and breeding them out of historical memory. The Assyrians were ruthless and awful. Also, it didn't work because they ran afoul of some tribal people from modern-day Iran and Pakistan, as well as more established kingdoms near modern-day Baghdad, and they were seriously weakened by the time you get into the 7th century BC, and they got replaced by the Babylonians. Now, the Babylonians, or the Neo-Babylonians, because we've already done one round of Babylon a long time before this, but the Neo-Babylonians, who are most prominently led by Nebuchadnezzar II, they are the last ones to be like, let's still try to do the thing that the Assyrians did. We'll just have a more robust administrative system, and then we can kind of keep our fingers on the tabs of things and make sure that nobody gets out of control. So they do some deporting as well. They do some absorbing of gods. They do some absorbing of resources. And maybe they're even interested in the idea of gradually breeding dissidents out of existence. So they conquered the southern kingdom of Judea in the 580s BC. Now there's no Jewish kingdom left at all for the promises of God about the Messiah to be fulfilled through. That's a big problem, and also a side note for our purposes today. Nebuchadnezzar and his successors build a gigantic, powerful, but very short-lived empire. That conquer, deport, and breed out of existence policy doesn't seem to be sustainable for the administrative technology that existed at this point hundreds of years before the time of Christ. The Babylonians then, as it's recorded in the book of Daniel, get conquered in 539 BC by Cyrus the Persian and his generals. Persia was in league with the Medes. They conquered Babylon and most of the ancient world. And Cyrus the Great, that first king, rules big time for the next 10 years. And the Persians learn something from the Assyrians and from the Neo-Babylonians. They figure out you just can't do all of this deporting like this. It's not going to work. It's cheaper and it's more effective to make friends wherever you can. Friends who still fear you a good, healthy amount, but friends wherever you can. And so Cyrus the Great lets the Jewish people go home, instructs them to rebuild their temple, their walls, the city of Jerusalem. He even funds it. So the Bible is very pro-Persia as you get to the latter half of the Old Testament. Persia does real well for a long time. They run into some speed bumps when trying to expand too far west. They get checked by the Spartans and the Greeks. But even after those defeats at the hands of the Greeks, they are powerful for another 130, 140, 150 years after that, before finally the weight of empire gets the best of them as well. And then the Macedonian sort of Greek leader, Alexander III or Alexander the Great, in the 330s comes and conquers Persia, defeats Darius III, their last emperor. He rules briefly with a more cosmopolitan, let's integrate everybody kind of approach to empire building. But as I said, he died pretty quick. His generals took over. They tended to be more ruthless and tended to crack down and demand submission to Greek culture and language, which did not go over well with the Jewish people or a lot of people. And the whole time that these little Greek general mini empires are going on, Rome is building up strength in the west on the Italian peninsula. Rome fends off its next-door neighbor enemy, the Carthaginians, and now it's free to go build an empire of its own. Rome, between the Old and New Testament, then expands west. Initially, it's a republic. That republic starts to break up in 44 BC with the assassination of the overly powerful political leader Julius Caesar. His godson, Octavian, who takes on the name Caesar Augustus, is the first leader of then what is effectively an empire with some impressions of a republic and a little bit of democracy left lingering. This is the political world into which Jesus is born. This is the political world, a relatively new Roman Empire, that is the political context for the book of Matthew and everything that we've been looking at here. Rome then, and boy, did I go down the rabbit hole there. We didn't even get to that next verse yet. Rome then learned the lessons from all of the previous empires who had come and gone before it, all the way back to Assyria, to say, we need to take the best from all of that and forfeit and move on from the stupidest of all of that. And so Rome adopts something of a hybrid system. The more developed the people group it conquers, the more Persia-like their behavior. The less sophisticated and developed the people group Rome conquered, the more hands-on its governorship might be. Judea and Galilee, the two Roman provinces that all of the action, or almost all the action in Matthew is taking place in, are pretty developed provinces. They're at the intersection of the whole world. They're culturally elite and also somewhat difficult to rule, but they rise to the level of being such a sophisticated, advanced people group that Rome sees the advantage in treating them as a client king state. That means you get to have a local ethnic ruler, a very controllable one, in this case, the Herod family, who is going to cooperate with Rome and provide stability and make sure taxes get paid, and also keep people under control by making them feel like, they have a say. And this isn't really that different. I mean, sure, there's some Roman presence, but in a way, we kind of have our old kingdom back, in a way, even though it's an ethnic outsider who's antagonistic to us who is governing, but he can be reasoned with. He's closer than the Romans. And that political friction that we've discussed so often is the one that's operating in the background of all the stuff that we're seeing between Jesus and the religious leaders. There's this whole bigger question people have, like, how do we get rid of the Romans, or how do we comply with the Romans to get ahead? This is where we get all the way back around to Pontius Pilate. Pontius Pilate then is not a client king. He's not a king at all. He's a governor or a co-manager of a Roman province that is also overseen by a local ethnic client king. In this case, it's always going to be a member of the Herod family. So Pontius Pilate is the governor of Judea, not the governor of Galilee. His headquarters are on the sea, a ways away from Jerusalem, but he has constant interaction with Jerusalem, and it's his job to govern here for usually what would be between a year and 3 years. Sometimes, as we'll see, those governorships would expand a little bit, and Pontius Pilate is somebody we know comparatively a ton about in terms of Roman governors, both because of the biblical accounts and because of the massive world-shaking revolts and political and military things that happened in this part of the world that Pontius Pilate played a little role in. So there's a lot of documentation about him, and we're going to start filling in some of those blanks next time around. But before we do that, I told you I was going to read that second verse. I'm going to read that second verse because I want you to actually hear the Bible say his name. They bound him, that being Jesus, led him, that being Jesus, away, and handed him over to Pilate, the governor. I totally should have read that at the very beginning, but hey, we got it in. More on Pontius Pilate next time around. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.